Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Parent Penalty Unconscious Bias Against Parents at Work. We're so thrilled you could join us for today's webinar. My name is Robert Dean. I'm leading marketing here at Lucy, and we've got three amazing speakers for you today on this topic. First, you'll be hearing from Shannon Spinache. She's Lucy's founder and CEO. Next, Allison Crawford will be speaking. She leads the parent ERG over at Uber. And finally, Cindy Oyong. She's Vice President of Diversity Inclusion at Charles Schwab. Super excited to turn things over to them. But before I do, I just wanted to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. Note that you all are on mute. We've got quite a few out there with us today. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout the session in the Q&A box you'll see just to the right-hand side of the slides. We'll try and answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the session, but feel free to ask them throughout. Also, do note that we will be sending out the slide deck and the recording to you by email after the webinar, so no need to go crazy with the notes. You'll definitely be getting that as a resource that you'll be able to share as well. And finally, I'd like to ask if you could take a moment before you leave today just to complete our survey. You'll see it at the bottom of the screen now whenever you log off, and it'll also pop up when we wrap today. Just completing that survey ensures that we're delivering the best quality material that we can that you find the most valuable. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things on over to Shannon.
So I'm Shannon Spinache. I'm the CEO and founder of Lucy. So thank you for joining us. So today I'm just going to talk about a couple big trends. So we call this the parent penalty, and I'm going to specifically talk about why bias matters. So when you do a Google search of parents are, this is what you see. This is what you see. Very funny results. I've never thought of parents as Trump supporters, but there we go. So yeah, just a quick note about Lucy. Lucy is a maternity and parental management solution. We provide comprehensive prenatal and postpartum support for parents who basically look like this. Two working parents, both very ambitious with their careers often. Families don't live nearby, so that's how we help. The core of Lucy's sessions, we do in-person one-on-one sessions in the home. We also do them virtually. We also do on-site group workshops. That means we come to your office and we help with things like, or we might do a workshop on infant CPR or car seat installation. But these one-on-one sessions are really kind of where the magic is. So these one-on-one sessions, they cover topics like lactation, nutrition, sleep, career coaching. It's meant to be really 360 degrees of care to help parents, to help your expecting employees transition into parenthood and back to work again, feeling productive and confident. So we really see three things happening, a few mega trends. The first one is what we call the millennial baby boom. Little known fact, millennials are actually the largest generation in history. They're bigger than the boomers, and millennials had 80% of the babies in 2015. More and more millennials don't live near their relatives, and working moms and dads are the fastest growing segment of the American workforce today. And something else that we also know about millennials is that they often reject male breadwinning models. They're often dual income households where both parents work. Second mega trend is that we are seeing this convergence of roles. So 40% of moms are the primary income source for their families, and 57% of dads say that fatherhood is central to their identity. And just for reference, that's only 1% less than moms. And then also 50% of fathers struggle with work-life balance, as opposed to 1977, where 35% of dads said that they struggle with work-life balance. So for the first time in history, I would say we see this massive paradigm shift happening where both parents want to be ambitious, want to be successful at work, but then also want to co-parent and make that work as well. This has been called the most transformative societal shift in the last century. So the big question is, how are workplaces preparing for and dealing with this trend? So third, this other mega trend that we see is that people are no longer just working and just kind of doing the compliance side of human resources. We hear over and over again companies saying that our people and our culture is our greatest asset. It's the most important thing to our company. And so people are really kind of at the helm of helping companies prepare for this shift. Yeah, so the last point on here is just that with these family dynamics changing where both parents are working and both parents want to be successful at home, workforce, and I'd also say health systems have really not evolved to accommodate these changes. So that's kind of where Lucy fits in. We're on a mission to really help companies manage these mega trends, both the millennial baby boom and also these roles converging. So in terms of in terms of bias, particularly around parents, not sure if you've heard of the implicit assessment test, but this was a project out of Harvard and another university that I'm forgetting now. But the project basically, what it was meant to do was kind of dispel this notion of that where for a little while we thought that bias didn't exist anymore. And what we realized was all the tests to test bias in the past were really about explicit bias. So questions would be asked like, do you strongly agree or disagree that Asians are better in math? And if you strongly agreed, so basically, over time, people learned how to game these tests and be politically correct and answer the question in a way that showed that they weren't explicitly biased. Yet, there was all of this kind of thing still happening in the workforce happening in life and society, where people were still experiencing bias, but it wasn't explicit, it was implicit. So implicit is just this type of bias that is just part of your unconscious. So these tests were created to actually assess that type of bias, the implicit or unconscious kind. And what's interesting is that you look across these tests and you see there's a test for weight, for age, for skin tone, religion, race, being Asian, sexuality, but there's not one for parents. The closest we probably get is gender and career, but it still doesn't get at biases that are particularly relevant to parents. So we at Lucy actually put one together. We kind of do this in real time. It doesn't translate so well over a webinar, but just wanted to point out that parents and bias is not something that is generally part of the diversity and inclusion conversation, yet it should be. So here's just a list of other resources. We will share this deck out later, so you can click on so that you can read more about this. But it is a really interesting and timely topic. So thank you all for coming. A special thanks to Allison and to Cindy. We're very happy that they joined us to do this, and I will turn it over to Allison.
Thank you so much for having me. I met Shannon a while back and was super excited about their mission that they're on. And we met up for, of course, in San Francisco Kombucha, and had a conversation about what we're doing here at Uber. And the biggest thing for me is getting people to understand the job that I have outside of my job. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that and how, there's a lot of HR professionals on the call, so I'll definitely keep it under wraps. But how can we better understand how working parents are handling stress outside of their 9 to 5, and what can we do as managers and leaders to tackle that? Cool. Just a little bit about myself. You can see here I am with my, I call her the roommate that won't move out. That's Lucy. She's 4 years old. And we live here in San Francisco with my husband. I work at Uber. I've been working at Uber for over a year now, and I sit on the Uber Everything team. And Uber Everything, if that doesn't mean too much to you, it's basically anything that's not the rides business. If you've ever ordered Uber Eats, or you've maybe seen something in the news around Uber Freight, autonomous trucking. We also have Uber Central, which we can call multiple cars. So I basically sell those products, and I sell Uber for Business the most, which is the business platform that employees can use when they travel. Before I joined Uber, I was at Yelp for many years. Since early days, I was there for almost 7 years. And my job there was a salesperson that sold to starting local businesses, and then I moved into the enterprise business space and really saw the company go from being in one country to, I think, maybe just under 40 countries over the time that I was there. So it was really great to see it go from that startup phase to something that we all now use for everything, from a dentist to finding a happy hour. During my, gosh, how many years I'd been there? I think my third year there, I became pregnant, and it was during the time that I was living in London with my husband, and it was in an office that had maybe just 10, 20, 30 people max by the time that I left. And I was the only mom. I was the only, I think, pretty much the only married person in that office. It was mostly younger millennials that I was working with. And that was a huge challenge. I was away from my family. I was literally on an island in Europe, and it didn't go so well. It was really a challenging experience to have that kind of life-changing event. And I feel like where the company was at that point, I should have been taken care of a little bit better. So everything else from that experience of working at Yelp, I can't say enough wonderful things, but I feel like no one should have to go through what I went through. And that has been my mission ever since. And since then, I started parenting groups at Yelp and women's groups at Yelp, and I ran those for years. And then when I came to Uber, I wanted to do the same thing because I saw a lot of the same things happening to working parents here at Uber. I'll go to the next slide. Cool. So what have I done? How am I making sure nothing happens? And how am I making sure that people aren't having that same experience? Well, we mentioned, I think it was Stephanie or Shannon mentioned an ERG earlier, and we see it here on the slide. What does that stand for? It's definitely new within companies now. It stands for Employee Resource Group. And when we think of what ERGs really, why they're important, we have 9 of them here at Uber. It's to find a place for a group of people where they feel like they can voice what's going on with them, and we can make sure that there is an unconscious bias happening. We can also put a strong emphasis on recruiting. So we have them for African American group here. We have our Asian diversity group. We have them for Jewish people. And the big question is like, well, does parenting get one? Like, is that considered, something that could be, in diversity and inclusion? And at the beginning it wasn't. And, why is that? But do people, are parents feeling discriminated against? Yes. So when Uber went through some changes, I don't know if you guys heard, but we've been through some changes recently, starting in January of 2017. And one of the biggest shifts was to put the spotlight on ERGs and to fund diversity and inclusion in a big way. So we were actually given a small budget of $3 million to put efforts towards diversity and inclusion. And I'm really proud that Uber made the fantastic choice to include parenting in that group. But that means that I can now host fabulous things like you see me here with Arianna Huffington just playing in a ball pit at our Take Your Kids to Work Day, which is on April 27th. And before, I wouldn't have had budget for something like that. So we had over 600 RSVPs for that. It was a huge, huge event. And we had these events in many other offices around the world. As you guys know, Uber's in 95 different countries. So most of our major offices had some type of event. Arianna, of course, didn't attend all of them, but it was really a special day where we were able to connect with senior leadership and then also bring parents together. I also am holding now weekly support calls, and I've been doing that for a year. And I block an hour on my calendar every Friday morning. And at Uber, if you block an hour on your calendar, that's like blocking a week normal company timeline. So I really put that hour aside to speak to parents and to listen and see what they're doing. I also recently just finished a training video series for all managers that are going to be dispersed. It's going to be dispersed, I believe, next week to the 2,000 plus managers globally at Uber. And the training videos are really to provide best practices for managers if you're managing someone that is a parent or they're going to be a parent. So before, during parental leave, and then after. So those are kind of like the high-level initiatives that we're working on here, and it's work that this is not my job. I sit on the business development team, the Uber Everything team. This is what I spend 20% of my time on currently. So let's jump into some do's and don'ts. I kept it to 5, and I would love to hear some feedback as well too. Towards the end, we'll do some Q&A, but let's jump into the first one. So if you guys know, the ultimate feminist Bible in my book is Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and it was published in 2013. And when I read that book, I was like, I think I finished it in a day. I was pregnant at the time, of course, so I was like extra, you know, lady power. I was pregnant with the girl. I'm like, you know, this is going to be an amazing thing. And one of the biggest takeaways from that book was don't leave before you leave. And you should definitely check it out. It's actually on leanin.org as well too. And what we're seeing is so much is that, you know, managers are making assumptions on how parenthood will affect their employees' career, and that needs to stop. It really does. And we have to have a better understanding of what parents are going through when they're either expecting themselves or if they have a partner that's expecting. That whole process, pregnancy is long. It's 10 months long. They tell you it's 9, but it's really 10. And it can be an emotional roller coaster. A lot of people move during that time because they want an extra bedroom. Sometimes you go to your doctor and there's a sonogram and it's not something that you want to hear or see. And that can affect and kind of seep into your professional life. And we need to make sure that managers are sensitive to those things that are happening. And we're not making assumptions of just because that employee has been a mess the last 10 months, that they're going to be leaving their job. And they're going to be strong and get through that, but they can only do that if managers are supporting them. So let's not make any assumptions on how parenthood affects your career, and let's really make sure that we're providing coaching and being extremely supportive when it comes to all types of parental leave. So I'm a member of the Parents in Tech Alliance, which is basically the equivalent of me, the head of Parenting ARG for every major tech company. We meet about every 2 months. So everyone from Google, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Salesforce, they're all there. And we all get in a room and we talk about how, you know, parents are being treated within those companies. Of course, like Facebook always wins and Google always wins because they're so massive and they have so much cash. But so we're always kind of like, tell us more about baby cash and all those kind of things. But really what we talk about a lot about is relying on the boss lottery. And what I mean by that is, so during my time, let's give an example at Yelp. Like I didn't have the best time when I came back from leave. My desk wasn't set up, my team had made some shifts, and it was not that great of a situation to be in. And it made it super challenging considering I had to leave then the office and go take care of a newborn. So let's say my coworker at the time also had a baby in a different office, and oh my gosh, when she came back to work, she had a tablecloth on her desk, she had fresh flowers, she had a card that was signed by everyone on the floor. They played her favorite song when she walked in, but they both work for the same company. And we can't rely on the boss lottery anymore. There has to be standardized policies when it comes to returning back to work. And then most importantly for existing parents. So if my daughter has a doctor's appointment, I should be able to work from home for that afternoon. It makes it easier. I don't have to go back and forth and commute, but maybe the boss on the floor, you know, has a really strict never work from home, no matter what policy. So we really have to make sure that we standardize policies and we make sure that they're across the company. And believe me, it's easier said than done because you're going to have some managers that push back and want to have stronger control over what their employees are doing. But we can't have a boss lottery anymore. And it's something that's really been a huge standout within the Parents in Tech Alliance that I've been a part of now for about 6 months. Cool. So next one, understanding my second shift. So as far as what happens after I leave the office and what happens before I get to the office and parents in general, especially with toddlers, and I always say like the 18-month-olds are the hardest because they're fast and they have zero concept of like what can injure them. So you're running a marathon before you get into work, and then when you leave work, you're also running another marathon. You also have to keep your relationship afloat, assuming that you have some type of partner, and give that partner the love and affection and attention that they need as well too. So we can't make assumptions around what the ambitions are, and we have to really understand what it's like when you come home. So sometimes what I do is I actually invite people to come home with me after work. My drive to work, I'm like, hop in the car with me. You're going to come to Lucy's school, and you're going to see me pick up Lucy. She's going to have about a 25-second meltdown as soon as we get in the car because her favorite song isn't playing, because my Bluetooth always blags when I'm setting it up, and she has no concept for patience. And I want you to experience that. And for employees that are remote, Cindy and I talked about this last week, you could even have, your kid on a VC at some point and have them understand the kind of demanding aspect of it, how it is being a parent if you do work remote or if you work from home. So we have to have a better understanding of what it's really like to have that second shift. So late and reoccurring meetings. So when I joined Uber, we had a lot of meetings. We still have a lot of meetings, and we still work really hard. I work with teams now in India, which means that those calls have to start around 8 o'clock at night. And that's okay occasionally, and it's totally fine. When you have a meeting that's something the equivalent of a team meeting that can easily be done between the hours of 8 and 5 or the working hours, it means a lot to have it be done during the day. An example is we had a meeting that was every Monday. I believe it was from 7 to 8. Maybe it was from 6:30 to 7:30. Anyways, it was during dinner time, and it made me miss my daughter's bedtime. And we're sitting in the meeting, and I was looking around. I'm like, gosh, I just hate missing bedtime. I want to see Lucy before she goes to sleep. And then I looked around the room, and there were also parents in the room as well too that were missing bedtime, and they were missing dinner with their families every single week. And I just asked my boss, I was like, do you think we can move this? Like, I'm taking a look at everyone's calendar. I'm seeing 2 other spots. And I'm so thankful my boss, who does not have children, who does not have a family, was completely understanding. And it just didn't occur to him. It didn't occur to him that we were all missing kind of that 90 minutes that I get or that we get with our families in the evening before they go to sleep, because kids go to bed early. So as far as flexibility goes, let's make sure that if we do have late meetings, there is some flexibility around it. I'm so thankful at Uber we do record meetings, so we can always listen to them later. There's nothing that's we're not saving lives here. We're moving people in Prius, right? Around the world. And let's allow for flexibility to make sure this doesn't affect the workforce. Okay, last one. Oh gosh, this one's the worst. You're such a mom. I hate it when people say that. It's the worst. Oh, as far as like gender types and comments, I mean, just to give an example. So when I come to work, I try to dress up. I try to prove a point. It's a slippery slope for me. If I'm not dressing up, then it's yoga pants, right? And then it's yoga pants 5 days a week. So I always make a point to dress nice. I wear heels, but sometimes I just can't do it, especially if I've been up. And there was one day I was wearing sneakers and, nice t-shirt, jeans. This is a tech company. It's not like I'm the only one that dresses that way occasionally. And my coworker said, "Oh, you're dressed like such a mom today." And I was like, okay, deep breaths, deep breaths. But then I look, and like my boss was wearing actually the same sneakers as me. He doesn't have kids, it was a dude, and was like, so he's dressed like a mom as well too. So you have to understand that when we're hearing those comments, we have to make sure that they stop. And it's easy, and my coworker didn't mean anything about it. He's a total sweetheart, and but it would have been nice if maybe another parent heard it and was like, yeah, but Allison brings her A game every other day or something like that. Or, actually so-and-so is wearing the exact same sneakers. So as far as those comments go, we know that the dads don't get it as much. It's from my experience. And we have to make sure that we're just stamping them out and we're standing up for each other. And that's my last one for there. So we can take a recap here now. Managers empowering, not making assumptions about them leaving. This is super important. When we talk about speaking up, it's a good thing. And really who I want to speak up and to defend when we hear these comments are the non-parents. We want to hear the people that, that don't have families of their own. And that's really what makes this work. We have to make sure that parenting is included in diversity and inclusion, and this can only happen if we have support from founders and C-levels. And that means that I'm part of that $3 million budget. I want some of that money for my events and to bring all of our countries together. And that means I need to hire and have people work with me. We also have to make sure that HR is involved when we talked about taking a look at what those policies are. And then last but not least, seeing that second shift and seeing that other job that I have that I'm going to be having for the rest of my life that I do not get paid for. It's like, volunteer work that I did volunteer for it, but it's never ending, and it's draining, and it can affect my work life. And I want to make sure that I can still be successful in my role. Cool. So now I'll pass it off to the amazing Cindy. Cindy was a former employee engagement employee leader over at huge companies like GitHub and Yahoo and Intuit. And we're really lucky to have her on this call as well, too.
Okay. Thank you so much, Allison. So I'm going to build off of what Allison just shared and talk a little bit about what we who are in positions that can impact bias can do to really mitigate that bias inside our companies, particularly against working parents. But before I get into that, just a little bit about kind of what I do in my background. Allison mentioned some of that. I have been leading diversity, inclusion, and employee engagement initiatives inside tech companies for the last 15 years. I am now focused on really accelerating diverse leadership in inclusive organizations. And I do that at 3 levels. The individual level through bringing together people from diverse backgrounds and doing a lot of leadership development through forums and coaching, as was mentioned earlier. At the organizational level, by helping companies really create inclusive strategies and implementing them appropriately. And then at the industry level, where I work with companies across a pretty broad spectrum to really accelerate and drive that change. So let's jump into some of the strategies that I advise some of these companies on. I think one of the first things to recognize is that everyone has unconscious bias. And that it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's something that's hardwired into human beings, and that we need to recognize that it exists. And that tech isn't the meritocracy that everyone likes to pretend that it is. So once we can kind of get past that, I think then we have the ability to really see what are potential strategies that we can put in place to help mitigate that. Because honestly, just making people aware of it is not going to be enough. There's a reason why it's called unconscious bias, right? If we're not conscious of it, then it becomes really hard to actually try to address it. And so thinking about ways that we can impact structures, systems, processes, underlying beliefs, and really challenging those is how we're going to be able to drive real behavior changes inside tech. And so one way that we have to really start to think about bias against working parents is how can we really innovate more family-friendly benefits and policies? So we know that paid family leave for all kinds of parents is really important. And if you aren't familiar with Jessica Shortall's TED Talk about why we need paid family leave, definitely go check that out. I think what's amazing is that you know, Allison mentioned the Parents in Tech Alliance. So there is this much more awareness amongst companies that parents have needs, and they're a huge part of the workforce that we want to attract and retain at our companies. And so you see companies like Apple, Facebook, and Uber, of course, now covering egg freezing for their female employees in support of starting families. And for people who have left the workforce for family reasons, Visa has this really great program called Ready to Return, which actually helps people transition back into the workforce. And, you know, they do that with like resume reviews, interview support, career coaching, and connecting people into a community where they can understand like what are the issues and what are the barriers that you need to overcome in order to transition back into the workforce successfully. So these are just a few examples of some really great things that are now trending that we need to think about and start to consider for our own companies if we're not already there. The next area is to look at really hiring. So designing an inclusive hiring process is going to be really important to attracting parents into the workforce. I had worked with a tech startup that really understood this after we got feedback from several candidates that our hiring process could be better. And quite frankly, you know, this isn't these practices aren't necessarily specific to one marginalized community over another. A lot of what I'm talking about applies to making the process better for everyone, right? But understand that it comes from a place where more marginalized communities see unfairness and bias happening in the process, and we have to be mindful of fixing that. And so what had happened was we realized that we had this 4-hour technical screener for these tech roles that meant that a lot of women and working parents were not considering even applying for those roles because like who has the time to spend 4 hours on a screener that you may or may not get an interview out of, right? So it was a real barrier to folks. And once we got that feedback and we looked at our process from a very end-to-end systems thinking perspective, we realized that there are a lot of things that we could do to start to mitigate the bias that had already creeped in and really expand the pool of candidates that would consider our roles. And so we did things like reduce the number of qualifications that were required in job postings. We had to up-level our interview team's skills to really focus on what are the behaviors and skill sets that you're looking for these roles, and to steer them away from all of the small talk that is great at building rapport with candidates, but not so great at mitigating bias in the process. Because once you ask people about their kids or you ask people about where they live, you know, then you start to form you start to bring to the surface some of those biases, right? That can actually impact your evaluation, and we want to stay away from that. And then, of course, we eliminated that 4-hour technical screener and put in place other exercises that didn't take as much time. And we saw the number of women applicants in particular jump over 20% to these roles once we did all of these things. Another thing to think about is how do you distribute development opportunities equitably? Allison brought up a great point about not making assumptions that a working parent is going to leave before they've actually left. And that has a lot to do with this strategy as well. I worked at Yahoo for a number of years and when Marissa Mayer took over the CEO role. And she was pregnant at the time, and that was a huge controversy. And you see here the actual news headline about, really, does it even matter? But that highlights for me how there are so many biases that exist, particularly for working moms, but also for working dads, around what it means to be a mom or a dad and have children at home and work at the same time, and all of these inherent assumptions that we make about, can they do it? Are they ready to commit? Is work their number one priority? And what does that mean for the work that we're doing if it's not? And so, I think trusting in our employees to be able to make their own decisions about their careers and not making assumptions about, oh, will they or won't they travel in this role, or do they have aspirations? Maybe they don't want to move up the ladder at this company because they have kids. Like, those are all assumptions that we need to avoid making, and work on how do you know what your employees want, know what their career aspirations are, and make sure that as you are evaluating them, either in your performance, promotions, or even just assigning key tasks and assignments across your teams, that you are thinking through, is there potential bias here? Am I only giving opportunities to one set of folks over another, and making that part of the decision-making and discussion process around development. Encouraging a speak-up culture. So this is also really important because I think, part of what you might have heard earlier is that a lot of times we as parents forget to ask for what we need. And so it becomes really important to have a company culture that really encourages people to speak up. I worked with a biotech company that created this wonderful framework to support employees really asking for what they need. And it was really based on kind of 3 key tenets, right? Inviting parents to really express what was going to be important for them, making sure that managers were equipped with the skill set to inquire about their employees' needs in order to be able to meet them, and then exploring different ways to meet those needs together. So it's not necessarily, again, a manager making an assumption of an employee who just came back to work after having a newborn, wanting a reduced schedule, right? And that may be the case, but it should be a conversation between you and the employee and the rest of your team in terms of how do you support each other. And lastly, supporting working from anywhere. I know that there's been a lot of controversy over companies who are moving away from supporting remote working arrangements. So you may have seen in the news, IBM recently reduced their remote workforce, and Reddit back in, I think, 2014 or 15, asked a lot of their folks to basically come to San Francisco and co-locate. But what we also see is that distributed workforces are becoming much more common. So startups like GitHub, Trello, Basecamp have very successfully built their businesses on distributed workforces, and have a lot of really great strategies in which that does work effectively and work well. And I think we need to challenge the assumptions that a lot of us make in tech, that collaboration and innovation really only seems to happen if we are together, and only happens quickly, right? If things at speed only happen when we're together, and that's not necessarily the case. And I think, again, to Allison's earlier point, we really have to allow for more flexibility, particularly for working parents, and what are the different ways in which we can do that. I will say that when back in 2012, again, the controversy over when Yahoo removed its work from home policy, there was a lot of actual misperception around that, where people were saying, oh, it's not going to be a family-friendly place to work anymore. That actually wasn't the case. Yes, we did reduce a lot of remote working arrangements, but what happened in practice is that we said to folks that, hey, you know, this doesn't mean that if you have a sick child at home and you need to not come into the office that day and work from home in order to take them to the doctor, like, do that. Like, do what's going to be necessary for you in order to remain productive. So there was a lot of those types of conversations happening at Yahoo as well. And so even when you see companies kind of moving more towards co-location, there are a lot of things that we can do to really, again, support working parents and help them feel like they're at companies that will give them enough flexibility to be able to manage all of the things that they've got going on. So just as a reminder, innovate your more family-friendly benefits and policies. Think about how you can make your hiring process more inclusive for working parents. Look at how you're actually distributing your development opportunities and make sure that you're doing that in an equitable way. Encourage more ways for people to speak up and ask for what they need, and do your best to support flexibility in working schedules and working locations as well. And I guess we're going to open up to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and also to Allison. Just before we get to Q&A, I just wanted to highlight that, you know, as I mentioned, working moms and dads are the fastest growing segment of the American workforce, and all of the practices that Cindy talked about, all of the things that we should be thinking about from a parent's perspective that Allison talked about, I just wanted to highlight that, you know, companies of different sizes need different things. So I think participating in this webinar, we saw that there's quite a few small startups as well as very, very large companies. And this is kind of the energy that we at Lucy are seeing around solving some of these challenges. And there's so many best practices for the very large, say 2,000 plus size companies, but there aren't many best practices for smaller startups. And what I would say, being a startup on the smaller side, we actually have 3 expecting parents here at Lucy. And we've had to very quickly find a way to support them. So you don't have to be a big company the size of Google or Facebook, or, you know, even as a small company, there are small things you can do. And we may not yet have a budget of $3 million for our Parents ERG, but we do find ways to support them. So if any companies are interested, big or small, reach out to us, reach out to Cindy. We definitely have some best practices to share. And I'm guessing Allison is always very generous and willing to take questions and help out. Feel free to reach out to any of us, because this is something that we're all going to have to work on. It's a really complex thing, and it's a really exciting time to be working on it. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Shannon. And definitely thank you, Allison and Cindy as well, too. We're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. We've had a ton of questions come through, so we'll see how many we can get through today. But the first question we've got, I'm going to go ahead and frame to both Cindy and Allison. This comes in from an HR perspective. Do you have any advice for leave when it comes to foster and adoptive parents?
I'll let you take that one, Cindy.
Yeah.
I'm far from HR. Yeah. I'm in sales. It's like literally the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you know, I have been fortunate enough to have been able to support equal leave for parents, no matter how they became parents, whether if it was by birth or by adopting or foster, whatever it is. And so, you know, my kind of automatic mode there is to say push for equal leave, and talk to the people who have influence and responsibility around that to push for it as well. In terms of what to do when you just don't have it, to kind of prepare your team. I think it's important to, again, use your voice. And like when talking to your team, I think Allison shared a really great best practice around preparing your manager and talking to your team and saying, hey, like, this is what's happening. Here's kind of how it might impact my life, or is impacting my life if you're in the midst of it. And, I just want to make sure that, help people become aware of the issues that you might be or are facing in that process. And so, then you can come up together with strategies on how to support each other. And for the most part, I think you'd be surprised. I've found that when people do that and tell folks what they need, more often than not, they tend to get a lot more support than they expected.
Great. Thanks so much, Cindy. The next question we've got is going to be framed towards you, Allison. How do you think about educating managers and other coworkers about assumptions around a parent's schedule or their ambition to take on additional responsibilities at work?
How do you train the managers? Like, how do you make them stop making comments and making assumptions? It's a lot. It's a lot harder than you think. And I always like to bring up the fact that it doesn't, just because that manager has a family and has kids and is married, it doesn't mean that they're going to not make those assumptions. I've actually seen many times that it can even be worse at times if you have a manager that might have a stay-at-home partner, or they might have very high income and is able to afford multiple nannies and very expensive school, and maybe they won't understand that their employees don't have those same resources. So I think the biggest thing is making them understand that it's going to be a different shade of parenting across your employees. There's going to be some employees that they might have kids and they work for you for 5 years and you've never even heard of them having children. And there's going to be some parents that report to you and they have a child that has special needs that needs to be, in the hospital once every couple months. And that means that they have to be staying home with them or visiting the hospital. So I think it's getting managers to recognize that it's not one, shape fits all or shoe fits all. It really is going to vary. And they have to understand that they must lead with a very open, understanding, thoughtful, and considerate way of approaching these subjects. You have very sensitive things going on with people, especially with relationships. When you think about, their partner and their life at home, their home life, you don't know what's going on. And you have to make your managers recognize that just because you might have the most perfect marriage in the world and all your kids are beautiful and smart and thriving, that doesn't mean that all of your employees are in that same boat. So they have to be extremely considerate and understanding at all times.
Great, thanks. And this next was also going to be for you, Allison. You mentioned that on Fridays, you host office hours at work for other parents. What type of questions do you get, or what kind of advice do you give during those sessions?
Yeah, good question. So for the office hours, it's not like I'm sitting there and like people are asking me about like nursing tips or like, how do I get my baby to sleep? I do know a lot about kids. I have my 12 ECE units. I worked as a nanny. I worked as a preschool teacher. I have 4 years of experience of being a parent myself. But I really am there to listen, and I'm there to coach any type of conversations that they might need help coaching with. So an example is I had a mom reach out to me who's out of our DC office. She was expecting, she was 4 months along, and she was terrified to tell her manager that she was pregnant, just terrified. She would get sick to her stomach just thinking about telling her manager. And that's not good, right? You should be really thrilled to tell everyone around you that you're going to be expecting a new family member. It's something that should be celebrated, and it's a fantastic thing. And in the end, we came up with how she was going to let the manager know. And I let her know, you don't have to come up with this big elaborate plan of what your leave is going to look like and how you'll be returning back to work. You just have to say I'm pregnant, and that's it. You can just leave it at that. You're only 4 months along, you know. And then we'll have those longer conversations around what your leave looks like and how you want to return and what your job wants, how you want your job to look like. And it was just like a weight off her shoulders. She was so happy. Actually, she started crying. She was like, I really appreciate that you simplified it so much. And the conversation with her manager, I checked in with her later, went beautifully. And her manager was so excited for her, and her manager had kids of her own as well too. So it could be anything from expecting parents, and then a lot of it is sometimes older kids as well too. Developing programs for older children. We're hosting a camp here in 2 weeks, a STEM robotics camp for ages grades 3 to 8. And I got a lot of feedback during those calls that they wanted some stuff for older kids here. So now we're hosting Lego robotics camp. So it can be anything from during or post parental leave during those calls.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Allison. The next question we've got coming through is for Cindy. Cindy, I know that Amazon a year or two ago initiated a 30-hour per week initiative. I'm just wondering if you've seen similar things that other companies are doing, or if there's any companies that are challenging the notion that employees need to work 40 hours a week to be invested in their careers.
That's a great question. You know, I have to say that I haven't seen tech companies really leading the way in this area, and I am surprising myself to have to say that it's actually government that has led the way, like government and NGOs, in terms of not feeling like employees have to put in 40 hours a week in order to be productive, and providing a lot more flexible part-time work schedules for folks, and not necessarily penalizing them for that either. So yeah, I'm actually, I think it's a great trend if in fact it is going to be one. It's nice to see Amazon starting to do that, but quite honestly, I don't know any other like big tech companies that are really leading the way around that. But if anyone else on this call does have those examples, please share them on chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Cindy. The next question I'm going to frame is for Allison. Allison, what have you learned about the biggest opportunities to integrate fathers into groups, discussions, and resources? And what is the responsibility of fathers, and how do you encourage them to be an active part of the conversation?
It's a great question. I actually have, I feel like I interact with more with dads than I do with moms here at Uber, just given tech in general. Demographics. So I'm working with dads a lot. And the way that I've done it, and I did this when I ran Women at Yelp as well too, is that you have to have your allies be your corporate sponsors. So for me, originally my corporate sponsor, or what they call like the A-team or C-level sponsor here, I didn't want Leanne Hornsey, who is our chief human resources officer, who is amazing, and I adore her. But that's too obvious, right? Like, she's a mom and she's an HR. Of course, she's going to be my sponsor, right? I actually went out and asked our who was acting as our CFO, Gautam Gupta, to be our sponsor, and everyone was like, "What? Why would you ask him? He's like just got married. He's a guy, and what is he going to do for you guys?" And I'm like, that's who I want, because if I'm up with him and he's supporting us, it's going to open the floodgates for getting our allies members as well too. And that's going to be men, and that's going to be men that don't have children. And those men that don't have children probably have girlfriends, and then those girlfriends are probably going to be turned into fiancés, and then they're going to turn into moms eventually. And then those guys are going to turn into dads, right? Like we know how this thing works. We see the movie, we know how it ends. So it's really important to, within the employee resource groups, pick those allies very thoughtfully. Whenever I would host panels, Q&A sessions for Women at Yelp, I would always have the moderator be a man. And I thought it brought a good mix, and it we had stronger male attendance, and it really encouraged everyone to get involved in the conversation and to hopefully fix the problems that are in place.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Allison. Unfortunately, we're going to have to go ahead and wrap things up here, but I do appreciate everybody for joining, and thanks so much, Shannon, Allison, and Cindy. It was great to have you guys with us. For everyone else out there, if we didn't get you your question, we'll try and respond, but definitely ask any additional questions in the survey. If you could take a moment to complete that before you wrap. Again, in the comment section, feel free to ask any additional questions. We'll try and respond to you by email to as many of those as we can. And also, please do remember that we will be sending out this slides and the recording by email. So look for that in the next couple of days. All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.